right. Hello, everybody. I'm Julia Pyper. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Communications at Good Leap. We are a clean energy financing company. I also host a podcast called Political Climate. Had to give that a shout out. And I'm lucky to be a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. And of course, we're joined by Congressman Raja Krishnamurthi today. Thank you so much for being here, sir. Really appreciate it. I know you're not very busy right now, I reckon. So. In the interest of time, so I know you have to rush, I'll quickly do a brief bio for the congressman. He represents the 8th District of Illinois, including Chicago's west and northwest suburbs. He serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He also serves on the Committee for Oversight and Reform, co-chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus on Immigration Task Force, an assistant whip for the Democratic Caucus. We could go on and on here, but I will leave it there for now to get into the conversation.
Sure.
So we got to jump into the news of the day, the Inflation Reduction Act. We just saw that pass in the Senate. I think we have a bit of whiplash, wondering what was going to happen there. There's a lot in the $750 billion bill. When you think about it, what is the headline in your mind? What do you want people to know about this package right now?
It's an amazing package. I'll just outline some of the main points. It basically, the headline for this conference is basically, it really tackles climate change in a significant way. It's the biggest investment we've ever made to try to lower carbon emissions for the country. On top of that, there are provisions to lower prescription drug prices, provisions to lower premiums for purchasing insurance on the Obamacare exchanges, and then provisions to lower the deficit by $300 billion, our cumulative debt over 10 years. And over time, it helps to control inflation. So those are the big headlines, but obviously tackling climate change is perhaps the most timely and relevant for this audience.
It's interesting to me that package started so large with a lot of social programs, and we kind of saw climate and clean energy become the bedrock of it at the end of the day. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Congress decided now was the time to make that a centerpiece of this reconciliation deal?
I think we're running out of time. I think everyone felt that the clock is running, not only in terms of, are we really going to control thermal management of the planet, but also the calendar. The election calendar is upon us, and so we have to figure out, okay, what is doable and what can we do quickly? And you find that Venn diagram, and we landed on this spot. And so I'm really proud that this week we're going to fingers and toes all crossed. It'll pass the House, and then it'll get signed into law, and away we go.
And so just for everyone's timeline setting, is the vote expected Friday? Is that what we're hearing?
That's right. And I think that there's a chance we might even accelerate that a little bit, but no later than Friday.
Got it. And for our purposes, roughly $70 billion in there for climate and clean energy programs. Is there anything you'd single out there for maybe the veterans community and the job growth that we can expect to see in these emerging and growing clean energy sectors?
Well, I'm founder and co-chair of the Bipartisan Solar Caucus in Congress. So I'm very focused on those provisions in particular, but these really apply to all sources of clean energy for the most part. The way I think about it, and obviously all of you are probably going to be unpacking this and learning about the more technical details over the coming weeks as regulations come out to actually give meat to all the provisions of the law. But the way I think about it is essentially there are a lot of tax credits in place for the manufacturing of components with regard to solar panels, for instance, or wind turbines, or even clean hydrogen. Then there's going to be tax credits for developers of projects that employ those particular technologies for the production of clean energy. And then finally, tax credits for the consumers, both residential as well as businesses who decide to buy that clean energy. So you're really talking about trying to incentivize all parts of the value chain, so to speak. And so you can imagine there's going to be tremendous prosperity and a lot of jobs created at every single piece of that chain.
I'm personally very excited about the 30% tax credit for solar, especially for homes, which kicks in this year. That means you can benefit immediately. We talk about when will this bill have impact. It actually, if it passes, would affect people in 2022.
That's right.
Which is interesting to think about.
And also, that's, by the way, that's layered on top of all the other incentives that different states, like Illinois, have already put in place for the production of or investment into solar panels, for instance. And so it's really exciting. We're finally reaching an inflection point where there's going to be so many incentives for buying solar panels and really getting into the clean energy game that I think people will not be able to resist doing so.
Yeah, I mean, it also has national security implications, right? I saw that the Netherlands just announced that they want to switch entirely to heat pumps, so electric heating and cooling systems to reduce their reliance on Russian gas. In this bill, there's lots of funding and rebates and tax credits for heat pumps, which sounds obscure and small,
yeah.
but it has national security implications.
Huge.
But I do want to ask about the timeline of that, because we are in this moment of an energy crisis globally in the wake of the Russian war in Ukraine. Will a bill like this have a real impact on that situation? Because we're looking at this winter, and this bill will take months and years to roll out. So how does that align in your mind?
I think, well, substantively, the implementation of this could be rather rapid, depending on how quickly the Department of Energy and other different departments issue regulations. So the message from people like me will be, it's time to hustle. We got to do this quickly. And then symbolically, I think there are a lot of signals that are going to be sent to the markets in terms of both buyers and investors getting in and taking advantage of as many of these technologies as possible right now, because they know that it's going to be very lucrative down the line as well.
It struck me that this is being...
So if I might kind of flesh that out, if you could imagine someone deciding, should I invest in a clean energy project right now, or should I stock up on inventory of these solar panels right now because I don't really know whether they're going to sell in 6 months? Well, the idea is, they're going to sell like hotcakes in 6 months. So go ahead and do that right now, and hopefully that will also lead to more sales right now.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what's unique and amazing about this bill is it's 10 years of certainty, which has never really existed in U.S. policy before. So we have to take a moment to appreciate that and the investments that can stem from it. Right. And I was going to say, it reads to me as much as industrial policy as it does a climate policy. Despite the headlines we see, the domestic manufacturing piece you pointed to, that is, strategy for decades to come in this nation.
Oh, totally. So myself, Senator Ossoff, and Dan Kildee of Michigan, we are the original co-sponsors of the SEMA, which is basically the Solar Energy Manufacturing Tax Credit. It's a series of tax credits. Basically, here's the deal, guys, which is that today, unfortunately, most of the components, if you want to install solar panels, come from abroad, okay? We believe, and as the chair of the Solar Caucus, I believe that we should try to keep tariffs as low as possible on as many of these components, except for the ones in China, made in the People's Republic of China, and we can talk about that more later. But except for those, we should keep tariffs as low as possible on components coming from the rest of the world. But at the same time, we have to invest in indigenous, American-made components long term. And so that's why this particular piece of the Inflation Reduction Act is so exciting, because we're going to have made in the USA components finally over the next 5 to 10 years, and that's incredibly exciting, especially for developers who are just looking for those sources but aren't able to find them right now.
Well, speaking of that, also what passed recently is the CHIPS Science and Science Act. So that would invest roughly $200 billion over 5 years into U.S.-made semiconductor manufacturing. Can you talk a bit about that bill and what it means for the U.S. economy?
Yes, it's actually getting signed into law right now as we speak. The bill signing is happening in Washington, D.C. at the White House. It's a bipartisan bill. Basically what it does is it incentivizes the production of semiconductor chips here in the United States. At one time, America manufactured more than 70% of these chips. It's now down to 12%. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to reshore a lot of this manufacturing. And as you know, a lot of these semiconductors are essential for the clean energy industry, whether it's solar or wind or other sources of renewables. We need more semiconductors if we're going to expand our production of all the components and all the pieces of the solar energy pie here. So I ran a small business before I came to Congress. We actually made semiconductors in part for the solar energy industry. And we were only one of a handful of people who did that. And so now hopefully we'll have a much bigger group of entities doing the same.
And I believe are there educational opportunities in that bill as well that I think might be relevant to this audience? Can you highlight any of those top of mind?
Well, there's a massive investment in research and development education opportunities within the semiconductor industry here in the United States. And so, for instance, the NSF budget is going to double. The NIST budget is going to double. And those particular agencies fund a lot of the educational and research opportunities in the clean energy space. It's a big deal. I just happened to be in Taiwan last week.
I buried the lead a little bit there.
And we can talk about that visit a little more later, but one of the big takeaways for me in visiting these countries is that they are incredibly excited about the CHIPS Act. They want to take advantage of these incentives to manufacture their semiconductor chips here in the US. And so I put my salesman cap on and pitched Illinois as much as possible because I think that we would be an excellent destination. But the point is that a lot of the world wants to shift from manufacturing these chips in places like the People's Republic of China, which is becoming a more unreliable partner in doing this type of activity, and bring it here to the US. So the CHIPS Act is going to be a magnet for all these different companies, not only here in the United States getting into the game, but also others across the world coming here.
So let's talk about Taiwan. You did travel there with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi recently. We did then, in the wake of that, see tensions rise with China. We can be familiar with that emerging situation. I guess you've since defended that trip. You referenced the economic opportunities. Reiterate or explain further why you thought that was important for the U.S. and for you to go there.
Sure, Julia. And I think a lot of you, as veterans, by the way, thank you for your service. I'm honored to be able to address you. And many of you as veterans probably served in East Asia. And I had the distinct honor of meeting many of the troops overseas. And many of them come from Illinois. So that was a special treat for me. But going to your question, I think there are two reasons why it was essential to go to Taiwan. One is, especially in light of Ukraine, we have to make sure that what happened in Ukraine does not happen in Taiwan. And the only way you do that is you achieve peace through strength. We have to bind closer to our partners, allies, and friends in the region, especially Taiwan, and make sure that we stand shoulder to shoulder with them as they face increasing bullying tactics from the Chinese Communist Party. And so there are certain things, certain discussions that you cannot have over Zoom. You have to be in person. If you're talking to admirals, generals, commanders, intelligence analysts, or even our Taiwanese counterparts and others that are very important for us to understand their needs and how we can supply their needs going forward. By the way, I should just mention, there's something called the Taiwan Relations Act. It is a piece of law that requires us to support the self-defense of Taiwan, even at the same time that we recognize the one China policy. So we are not only, in my opinion, ethically and morally obligated to support other democracies who are under threat, but we are legally obligated as well. And so that was the purpose of that visit.
So in the wake of that, we did see China say that it would, sever certain types of negotiations with the U.S., specifically on climate, which could threaten things like agreements on curbing methane emissions, et cetera. How do you see that playing out? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what are ways that we can make sure that some of those areas of work could still continue despite the tensions?
I think we go back after Friday. After this passes through the House, after it gets signed into law, probably next week in a huge Oval Office signing ceremony, we go back to our friends, allies, partners, and then other places like the PRC and basically say, hey, let's talk Turkey. This is what we did. We're putting real skin in the game. And now what can we do together to make sure that we can collectively tackle this global challenge in a meaningful manner? So that will be, to me, a good icebreaker.
Yeah.
What we do on Friday and signing the Inflation Reduction Act into law.
First things first. We talked about Ukraine a little bit. I want to ask how you think about balancing three core things: affordability for consumers, the need to decarbonize, and then also immediate energy needs, which is still largely in a fossil fuel-based system.
Yes.
And so even in the Inflation Reduction Act, there is ability to do more oil and gas drilling on public lands, et cetera. So how do you balance those three concerns and initiatives?
Well, I got to go now. This is the $1 trillion question. I'm not sure what number. Yeah, multi-trillion dollar question. It's a balancing act, honestly. It's both it's a scientific question, it's a political question, it's an economic question. It's all of those questions all bound up in one challenge. The way I look at it is today we have to do whatever we can to wean ourselves off of Russian fossil fuel. And that means, in the case of Germany, they are going back to using certain types of fossil fuel indigenous to Germany. And other countries are using more nuclear and so forth. But that's a very important and practical challenge right now, because we can't have Russia hold us hostage based on a dependence on them for our energy. That's not going to work. So let's be very practical today. But over the medium term and the long term, we're going to have to switch, right? We're going to have to switch from fossil fuels to other forms of energy, and that's where the Inflation Reduction Act really kind of kicks in and makes it more possible for that to happen. But as of today, the number one challenge is keeping energy prices low, accessible, and making sure we're not reliant on Russian fossil fuel.
So one other topic we could spend a whole session on, but we'll do one question on, is the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which we're just starting to see those funds roll out at the state levels. This is a $1.2 trillion bill. Anything you would highlight on that as it starts to affect states like Illinois and others?
Well, it's very interesting. Again, regulations are coming out literally by the day on this. I think all of you understand this idea, but the regulations need to come out so that people know exactly how the law is going to be implemented. And so we're seeing a lot of regulations, especially come out with regard to electric vehicle charging networks and so forth. Illinois is going to get $149 million for its EV charging network, for instance. However, I know that the leadership here wants to go for even more, and so there are competitive grant challenges in the billions if we can go after that as well. So there's one part of it that I am also focused on, which is the grid. There's money in the infrastructure. It has such a weird name. It's the IJA, actually, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I believe. Yep. IJA. And so IJA also has multi-billion dollars worth of investment tax credits and so forth for upgrading of the grid. And as you know, the grid needs to be upgraded if we're really going to go to a renewable energy economy, because that is the rate determining step in many cases for projects, solar projects, for instance, but also wind projects going online and being able to basically flow those electrons from one part of the country where they don't need it to the parts of the country where we do. And so that is a big issue within the IJA that I'm following.
We only have 4 minutes left with the congressman who has a flight, so it's not a joke, he has to go. But I will say, if you have questions for those watching online, you can put them in the Q&A function, and we can probably take maybe one, whoever's fast to get up to that mic. And please keep it short. I'll do my last question in the meantime if anyone wants to get up there. I have to also acknowledge we're in an election year. So,
what?
Yeah, surprise, breaking news. So I wanted to know, how do you think Democrats can maintain control of Congress, if you think that's possible, and what would the future look like if you were to maintain control?
Do you have an easy question?
No, we only had 20 minutes, I put all the hard ones in.
Okay. I think the way to maintain control is to do good things for the people of the United States and let the politics take care of itself. So I think the Inflation Reduction Act, to me, is significant. When I talked about it with my constituents over the weekend, they really couldn't believe it, that we actually, A, came to a deal, and B, that it would actually tackle some of their major kitchen table topics that really bedevil them on a daily basis. So prescription drug prices is an easy one that everyone understands. Capping insulin costs at $35 a month for Medicare beneficiaries is a big deal. We can talk all day about why I think it doesn't make any sense for insulin to be any more costly than $35 a month in the first place, since the formula for it hasn't changed in decades. But setting that aside, capping it and making sure that people on fixed incomes, namely seniors on Medicare, not having to pay more than $35 a month is a game changer for them in their lives. And so if you go down the line on all those provisions, and we can actually get it passed and signed into law, and we talk about the future and how it's going to change because of it, I think people are willing to give you another look if they were thinking that things are too broken and perhaps we need a change in leadership. We've had 52 days of gas prices going down in a row. That's not good enough. We need a lot more. But for the first time in a long time, I saw gas come to less than $4 a gallon yesterday. I had to do a double take. But that's the type of thing that you talk about, and hopefully people see a better future.
I think we'll all be watching to see how that rolls out, and we have to, I think, acknowledge that it's fantastic to see Congress acting. We just talked about a handful of legislation that just got done. So good luck.
As a former president was once said, there's so many wins, you're going to get tired of winning. And I think that Joe Biden, to his credit, even in quarantine, has managed to get, hopefully the Inflation Reduction Act done. The PACT Act, I don't know if anybody's following that. Tomorrow, that's getting signed into law. Finally, veterans who suffered from being exposed to burn pits are going to get relief, finally. Of course, we're talking about the CHIPS Act. We took out the number 2, President Biden at his leadership took out the number 2 leader of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and the list goes on and on. So hopefully people start to notice, but we have a lot of work to do.
And with 1 minute, please, a question.
Congressman, thanks for being here. I appreciate your comments about bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. I'm curious if you think what's in the Inflation Reduction Act is going to be enough to compete with China's command economy, if you think it's sort of the start of a much larger, longer process.
I think it's the start of a process. Obviously, within the People's Republic of China, they subsidize the production of pretty much every part of that value chain to such a degree that they try to undercut their competitors, and they often succeed. But all that being said, that's why I think when I first was talking about those tariffs, I think we do have to put countervailing tariffs on Chinese components and Chinese-made goods because of precisely the issue that you said, so that our companies can compete. I think a lot of other countries are doing the same, by the way, with regard to Chinese-made equipment. And by the way, I should just mention, now there's credible information that a lot of this equipment is made in forced labor camps, especially by the Uyghurs. So there's all kinds of just bad stuff happening in the PRC, and so I think we have to tariff that stuff.
We will leave it on that note, as I know you have to go. Congressman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your service. Thank you.